Hey, Alex.
Hey, Jason.
I have a different kind of brand for us to talk about. The challenge was not packaged goods, no red, and something that is more in the technology space. And there's a brand that I'm bringing up because it's a story of discipline in branding, a little bit different from what we've done. I think what's beautiful about this brand is what they don't include.
I was going to say, Jason, it's abnormal for you to bring a fintech brand to the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, this is a fintech brand called Spade. It's a B2B fintech brand that is all about enriching transactions for customers. So, in the fintech space, when a credit card is used, banks get a messy data of like, I don't know where this transaction went from. And this company called Spade is unlocking layers of information for banks and merchants so they can better service customers in their own company. This rebrand was done by a branding agency called Together in London, and they built the entire brand on this act of restraint.
And Jason, just as you were talking through that, as a product marketer here, my job is to communicate technology. So the fact that you were able to explain just now what this company does based on their brand work, already a win.
Exactly. So it's, no coincidence that we're pulling up the brand identity. Shout out to a great blog about branding. I want to start by talking about the logo. So, Spade, they had so many things together. The agency had so many things they could have pulled, right? They could have pulled this idea of using a card suit, or they could have pulled a garden tool. There were all these kind of ideas. They could have pulled a shovel. And what they ended up using was an apostrophe. And I was like, what is this logo? What does this mean? And then when I started digging into it, it was like, oh, what does an apostrophe mean? It means that there's more to it. Things are being left out, just like the data that they're surfacing for their clients, for their customers. I was like, this is really interesting. So the word mark already has this idea of there's more to it. And then going one step further, their illustration style is actually where I really started to pay attention and fall in love. So they use this typographical illustration style where layers of everyday products that people buy and trying communicating the data that is under all these layers of transactions, but doing this in a way that is building it with topographical information. When I saw this, I was like, this is actually really interesting because the idea is all about going deeper in your transactions.
I
And
love anything that speaks to the technical functionality too. How do you communicate the value prop of something like an API on a very emotional human level? And that's what they're accomplishing here.
exactly. So this is their website. I really like the way it comes to life and talking about the infrastructure for innovation and the clarity that they bring to the B2B space. It's all with purpose. And what this isn't is probably more important than what it is. So, what it isn't, it's not big photography. It's not trying to be cinematic. It's not trying to put more in the brand guidelines there really needs to be. There's a lot of restraint here that is very obvious.
What do you think the brief was that led to that kind of decision to be more minimalistic and restrained?
That's a good question. I would imagine that this brief would have been that we need to communicate what we are to future customers and vendors in the B2B space. It's a fintech company. And that is revealing more data within every transaction. Okay. Well, if we have this idea about go deeper in every transaction, my words, not their words. It's how do we do it in every step of the brand? Because it even goes one step further. So the color palette's built out of these earth tone colors, from greens to browns to beiges, but the concept is it's all meant to go deeper into the earth, deeper into this topographical style. What it isn't, again, it's not blue, it's not purple. So it automatically stands out in the fintech space. And there's a reason to pick these colors.
Well,
It's
what I
about
like about the green is it speaks to grass, like the surface of the earth, but it also speaks to money.
It speaks to money. Yep. Yep, exactly. And when it all comes together, it feels more reminiscent to dot matrix displays and information on a computer that feels almost a little nostalgic, but not in a way that feels backward looking,
Hmm.
in a way that there's data
I
at the
do think
core.
technology brands in general often over rotate on trying to convey innovation and being futuristic. And as a result, it's actually more abstract and dry, and it all ends up looking the same as opposed to more human motifs like this idea of the earth.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I always like talking about what I wish they would have done a little bit differently. I
Do
think
it.
visually, it's spot on and the restraint really works. But I'm not getting the payoff on the messaging. I wish there were these headlines about go deeper with your transactions, or there's more layers underneath, or like I'm not writing lines, but data that builds smarter systems, reward accuracy, confidence in every transaction. There's an idea that's not being surfaced with the
That
message.
is where my PMM brain went right away, is the messaging and the copy. The fact that the headline isn't speaking directly to the visual. You have this amazing visual. You have these very everyday moments like the Starbucks cup, which is incredible. And I wish I could get my hands on that and play around with it because data that builds smarter systems could go on anybody's website.
Good point. Good point. So I would push them to find their positioning and be more ownable in messaging that they
Jason,
choose.
speaking of being ownable, one thing I've heard from our customers in financial services or professional services, maybe even healthcare, is that everything is stocky. And if you didn't have a logo, no one would be able to tell that it's their brand.
Mhm.
Why do you think brands in these sectors specifically struggle with crafting a standout identity?
It's a good question. We were mentioning that when we were talking about how in the past weeks we've pulled more packaged goods in CBG, is I think the answer is that tech brands, AI brands, tech brands, fintech brands are driven so much by data, so
Mm.
much by data. And when something works, the industry pays attention and then overcorrects. It's not an accident that tech brands have access to data and are able to pull it and synthesize it and interpret it and analyze it and use it to the ability to create action items on it. And when you build your brand based on that data, then it makes sense. There's a sea of sameness in these industries. There's a sea of sameness in any industry.
Hmm.
When we were talking about Stranger, the candy brand last week, we were falling in love with the thought that that brand wasn't high polish, 3D rendered images of the fruit that it's represented in the flavor profile. And it was more reserved to this abstract, beautiful, lo-fi, grainy visual aesthetic. It stood out. And tech brands often have trouble standing out, but the ones that stand out really stand out and people talk about. Now, is Spade one of those? Time will tell, but it's worth giving them the props of creating a design system where every decision that they made goes back to who they are and what they offer and the idea behind that.
Another thing I wanted to go back to was the illustrations. You mentioned that they chose not to use photography. And I'm wondering, how do you do that at scale? Illustration is very difficult to accomplish. How might you potentially use AI to accelerate the different sort of situations that they're putting forward here, right? Like there could be an illustration for anything. With financial services, that's the thing, right? It's getting gas, it's getting coffee, all these different possible moments, and you need illustrations for all of those. And so, how hard would it be for this brand to be able to scale that?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think emerging technology AI tools come in. Imagine if Spade came to us and said, "Hey, we have this style. We want 500 assets. We want a tool to make 500 assets of every possible industry and vertical and product and service. And there is a system here. And I think this could be done in so many different ways with technology. We could just create a proprietary tool where you put the product where you have a reference and it spits out this typographical illustration animation. Or you could put these brand guidelines in Brand Studio and train your own brand studio on these guidelines and recreate this and scale it from here. So it's not that the brand guidelines was made with AI, right? It's like the brand guidelines are building blocks. Now this is a system. If you want to scale, you want to localize, and you want to do it fast and efficient, you can really superpower these guidelines, especially because there's so much restraint. Like, this is the perfect system to put in AI because there's not a ton of interpretation for a model to interpret it incorrectly. This is what I want to put into Brand Studio and really scale it up.
And there are very specific ownable elements that go beyond the colors of the font that you need to be able to get right, like typography. That is a motif that is central to this brand and their campaign. And so it'd be really interesting to see what you could do to replicate typography with AI.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about a couple of those like really fine details that maybe the average person doesn't see.
Hmm.
All of these that we're looking at the screen right now, they're all very similar angles and perspectives. And the distance between the layers, there's a consistency to that. The thickness of the lines of each layer also has a consistency. And the animation of how it grows and then shrinks, there's a universal rule in there as well. So all of these, like Spade and together, will know exactly if a version of this is right or wrong. There's a lot of rules.
Very cool. Jason, I think it's safe to say we dig this brand.
Ha 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 ha. I was waiting for the pun. Yeah. Yeah, it is a good challenge to find a brand in a different sector like fintech. And I was looking for quite a long time. When I discovered this brand, I was like, oh, I love the story of what they didn't include. And I think it is like just a great thing to celebrate a brand that made decisions when they created their brand system.
And I think the takeaway here for a lot of those sectors that maybe don't have as sexy of branding as CPG or fashion or retail, these other sectors really want to be able to stand out with a brand. It's just as important, but they seem to run into more obstacles and have to fall back on all using the same stock photography libraries. And so they really want to be able to bridge the gap between that generic looking brand and being able to stand out. And I think this is a really great example of doing that.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about it before, where what frustrates me more than anything is the idea of B2B brands looking B2B. It doesn't matter what sector you are, what vertical you are, what your company does. You can make your brand cool and sexy and provocative. It's just needs to start with an idea, a positioning, and a strategy.
100%. Awesome. Thanks for bringing this brand. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. Okay. So on to the next one. Let's find more brands that feel completely different.
Sounds like a plan.
Cool. Thanks, Alex.
See you, Jason.